A Bitter Taste by Pure Foy's Girl. Chapter 4. Will found himself closed back into the hallway to the dining room where the staff was hard at work clearing away the remains of their feast. He idly wandered into the kitchen, looking here and there as if Hannibal might have left evidence disclosing the nature of his exquisite creations. There was none, of course. It had only been amusing to consider it, making a nuisance of himself among the servers as they tried to perform their duties around him.
Will?
He turned, making sure to have a smile on his face that felt all too real when he met Hannibal's gaze.
The guests have gone,
Hannibal said, unmindful of the busy chaos around him.
Will you come with me?
He moved as if he'd been told instead of asked, eager to know if Hannibal might well and truly be a monster like himself. He followed in Hannibal's wake, aware of the lithe, predatory way he moved. It was the way he himself moved when his attention wasn't focused on hiding it. Silently, purposefully, fluid with intent.
Please,
Hannibal said, pausing in the doorway to gesture him within.
Make yourself comfortable.
Will looked around as he went in, finding himself in a stately office with an open upper level devoted entirely to bookshelves, every last one of which was stuffed to overflowing.
Is this where you work?
He asked, trying to look everywhere at once. There was a statuette on a pedestal near the far entrance, a heavy stag with head uplifted. It seemed out of place in this room, but also very much a part of it. He was so busy looking at it that he jumped when Hannibal spoke.
This is my office, yes. Now, do you wish to exchange more pleasantries, or was there something else on your mind?
Will tore his attention off of the stag and focused it back on the man regarding him with the stoic, removed beauty of a Grecian god.
You were very eager to be rid of Matilda's grasp,
he observed, sounding amused.
Desperate enough to flee straight into the grasp of a stranger.
Will smiled, cocking his head in a way that was coy by design, especially when coupled with a wide-eyed gaze.
Stranger? I thought we were friends, Hannibal.
There was a long considering silence before Hannibal told him.
I imagine we could be, Will, provided you are honest with me.
Likewise, Will retorted, drawing closer.
So tell me, Dr. Lecter, why so eager to rescue Ganymede?
Hannibal's mouth twitched slightly, a bare hint of response, perhaps amusement, maybe irritation. Will couldn't read him like he could read other people. The man staring down at him with glittering dark eyes kept his life a closed book to those around him. He leaned close enough that Will's heart skipped a beat, shocking and delightful. He was so intrigued by it that he didn't even break eye contact, just twitched softly when Hannibal's breath whispered over his mouth.
The game of seduction goes both ways, Ganymede. Never forget that when you're getting yourself carried away by hungry eagles.
He purred, his fingers lifting to barely graze Will's chin, just enough to make him reflexively tilt his head.
Alas, I only wish to draw you.
What? Will asked, all poise forgotten. He truly couldn't recall the last time he'd been so profoundly affected this way, and for the first time in a long time he felt the ghost of being alive unfurl to haunt him. Hannibal had already moved away to his desk, gathering up supplies as if Will wasn't standing there in the middle of his office, adrift in a sea of surprised awe.
If you wouldn't mind,
Hannibal said, moving to sit in one of the two chairs facing one another.
I should like to draw you on the chase.
Will controlled the urge to scowl. Indignant, he asked,
Draw me. Yes, please,
Hannibal said, unruffled as he arranged his sketchbook on his crossed knee.
Lie however you're comfortable,
Hannibal said, inspecting the tip of his pencil.
Nude, of course.
Will almost laughed aloud at that one, then peevishly remembered he was supposed to be presenting the picture of touchable purity, not revealing the jaded soul that lay within. Not until he knew if Hannibal Lecter was a monster like himself or not.
What will you draw me as?
Will asked, quietly undressing with his back to Hannibal, folding his clothes carefully and placing them in the other empty chair, his shoes neatly beneath.
Yourself,
Hannibal answered, watching with measuring, critical eyes as Will retreated to the chase, utterly nude.
Or should I say, I will draw you as I see you now? Do you expect to see me differently later?
Will asked, his skin prickling with goosebumps under that gaze. He tentatively sat, swinging his legs up to lie stretched out, his body falling into a natural, graceful line more from habit than intent.
I hope to,
Hannibal said, and there was a hunger in his gaze that rivaled anything Will had ever felt himself, not for flesh or touch, but for knowing.
Try not to move, Will.
He relaxed into his adopted pose, languidly watching Hannibal devour every nuance of his body, down to the finest detail.
You truly feasted tonight,
Hannibal said, opening the door for conversation.
You were telling the truth when you said you were starving.
Will considered the myriad routes this conversation could take, and finally settled on a neutral,
Yes? Is most food not as palatable for you as mine?
Hannibal pressed, his mouth set with concentration, eyes following the curve of Will's hip down into the dip of his waist.
I had a funny feeling you already knew that, Dr. Lecter,
he said, and when those dark eyes flicked to his in reproach, he amended.
Hannibal, I know only that a famished young man has no business remaining that way.
Hannibal told him, his hand moving quickly over the page, lingering here and there as his gaze did, rendering Will down to strokes and shadows on paper.
Will you go home to Matilda, Will? Not sure she'd have me after tonight,
Will admitted, hiding a smirk in his arm, holding still when Hannibal made a small noise at him, the same way a man might call to a cat.
She paid out the nose to dress me for your dinner party, not to mention the other things she's bought me. Did you ask her to?
Hannibal asked, seeking his eyes again, which Will eluded by closing his own.
Nah, she insisted. Considering I've been living with her for a week, she probably felt it was time to make me decent. And you have nowhere else to go,
Hannibal observed, sketching earnestly.
No,
Will answered, figuring he'd have to find a hotel somewhere near, someplace where he could be anonymous.
Then you'll stay here, Will,
Hannibal said, pausing long enough that Will opened his eyes, feeling a second thrill in the pit of his stomach to find Hannibal staring at him with dangerous intent, barely restrained by his veneer of control. I want to see it unleashed, Will felt with sudden and shocking clarity. I want to see him undone and wild, coming apart at those expensive seams so I can see what lies beneath. He might very well end up an entree at Hannibal's next dinner party and a footnote in his many harvests, but he had a sudden, heady understanding that it might just be worth it.
You'll stay here,
Hannibal said again, a statement of fact, not an offering.
So you can draw me nude whenever you like?
Will offered, deliberately flashing the long line of his throat, inordinately pleased when Hannibal's eyes fixed there for a brief moment, his mouth pressing closed as his teeth clenched.
I would never make demands on anyone who is a guest in my home,
Hannibal said, no trace of a tremor in his deep voice.
Perhaps I'll insist,
Will murmured, wondering how far he could push before Dr. Lecter pushed back, and with what amount of force.
In which case I would have no choice but to oblige you,
Hannibal said, a slight smile transforming the stoic lines of his face into that of a benevolent god, chased in shadows.
Yet I must ask, Will, what precisely was it about my food that seemed to satisfy you so deeply?
Will turned slightly onto his back. This time Hannibal didn't make the soft noise at him, just traced the newly bared planes of Will's belly as he twisted to offer more. With an angelic flutter of his lashes to offset the bite of his response, Will sweetly purred, I think you mean who? The pencil didn't stop moving. Those dark eyes gave away nothing. There was absolutely no response to Will's needling remark, except a slight curl to the corners of his mouth that Will was rapidly learning to be a sort of delight. Delight in being called out, delight in being surprised, delight that a man who looked like a barely legal boy might dream of playing a game of wits with him. The odds were in Will's favor on that count. Centuries of experience in the human condition had certainly taught him well.
Did you enjoy your place at my table, Will?
Hannibal asked, blinking slowly as he assessed the man stretched out before him.
I understand it's a singular honor, Hannibal,
Will said, rolling onto his back, one foot sliding up the silky material of the chaise to raise his knee, an illusion of modesty. Hannibal once more did not chastise him.
One you reserved for an old friend? Yes,
Hannibal said, eyes tracing the dip of muscle just above Will's belly button.
Such a pity he could not make it. I do so enjoy having an old friend for dinner. What a coincidence! I happen to enjoy it myself.
In the stretching silence he heard Hannibal gently replace his pencil and the soft rustle of paper.
Would you like to see?
He made a show of sitting up, stretching like a cat woken from a nap, and shaking his head to tousle his curls. He could feel Hannibal's eyes on him like a physical touch, holding a reverence and appreciation reserved for works of art. Naked as birth, he moved closer and leaned in to look down at what Hannibal offered him. Himself, draped on a scrolling chase, shadows and light, an expression of smoldering, insatiable need in the elegant lines of his face.
I said I would draw you as I see you now,
Hannibal purred, watching his reactions carefully.
You drew me to be quite
edible, Will said, and bit his lower lip in a brief gesture of uncertainty designed to inflame.
Is that what you want, Dr. Lecter? There is a certain beauty to consuming something as potent as youthful bloom,
Hannibal said, turning his head just slightly so Will caught the lurking remnants of a smile on his lips.
Figuratively speaking, of course. But I wonder, Will, what tastes we have in common. I would say, at the very least, old friends?
He was utterly delighted, shocked, and excited when Hannibal moved with preternatural speed to snatch him up as he stood, the sketchbook falling unheeded to the floor.